is related to BSHF 101, Unit 5, Pre-Colonial and Colonial India. Introduction. India was a direct colony of the British, and the impact of the colonial rule over the economy, society and polity of India has been quite deep. Many serious consequences of the British colonial rule are still persisting, and this makes the study of colonial phase of India very relevant for understanding many contemporary aspects of the Indian society. It must be stated at the outset that direct colonial rule leaves a total impact on the colonized society because every aspect of social life is influenced by the policies of the colonizers. A direct colony is under the complete control of the colonizers, and colonial policies and interest penetrate every aspect of social life of a colony. Another important fact about India is that the colonial rule lasted for a very long time, and this longevity of the colonial rule over India affected the vitals of the Indian society. The long period of British rule over India provided enough time to the British to establish strong and stable institutions for the governance of India. The journey of British occupation of India was slow and steady, and it passed through various stages. This evolutionary process provided the British an opportunity to evolve their policies and change their policies on the basis of experience gained through practice. But before we go into that, we should have a look at the nature of Indian economy prior to British rule. Characteristics of pre-colonial economy. India in the pre-colonial period had a stable economy, self-sufficient agriculture, flourishing trade and rich handicraft industries. These were some of the features of the Indian economy. Let us look at them separately. Agriculture. Agriculture operations were carried on in India by subsistence farmers, organized in small village communities. Village was more or less a self-sufficient economic unit, and its business contacts with outside world were limited to a payment of land revenue, generally in kind, and the purchase of a few necessary things from the town nearby. The farmer raised only those crops which he needed for his own use and shared the same with the village artisan who supplied him with simple manufacture that he needed for his domestic consumption. Means of communication were of a primitive type. Therefore, trade in agriculture produce was somewhat limited. The farmer usually raised enough produce to feed himself and the non-agriculture members of the village community. If his crop yielded more than the consumption needs due to favorable climatic conditions, he stored that surplus for use in the lean years. Storage of food grains was a common practice among the pre-colonial agriculturists and constituted under these conditions the only remedy against famines. The pattern of agriculture continued throughout the medieval times. However, towards the end of the 18th century, the village communities began to break up under pressure from new forces which imparted dynamism to the Indian rural economy. This happened mainly because of two factors. Number one, the changes in the property relations brought by the introduction of new forms of land tenure, which you will study a little later in this unit. 2. The development of an active export trade in agriculture produce of India. The contact with the West through the establishment of British rule was responsible for both these developments. Trade. In spite of the fact that the Indian villages were largely self-sufficient units and the means of communication were primitive, India enjoyed extensive trade both within the country and with other countries of Asia and Europe. A balance of the import and exports was maintained. The items imported into India were pearls, wool, dates, dried fruits, and rose water from the Persian Gulf, coffee, gold, drugs, and honey from Arabia, tea, sugar, and silk from China, gold, musk, and woolen cloth, metals like copper, iron, and lead, and paper from Europe. The main items exported from India were cotton textiles. Besides cotton textiles, which were famous the world over, India also exported raw silk, indigo, opium, rice, wheat, sugar, paper, and other spices, precious stones, and drugs. The major feature of Indian trade in pre-colonial time were number 1, a favorable balance of trade, number 2, a foreign trade much suitable to the level of manufacturing in India. A favorable balance of trade meant an excess of exports over imports, that is, India exported more than it needed to import. Since the economy was on the whole self-sufficient in handicrafts and agricultural products, India did not need foreign imports on a large scale and continued to enjoy a healthy trade. Secondly, India's foreign trade suited its requirement very well. In other words, the commodity pattern, so important to any country's foreign trade, was in India's favor. India exported the items it specialized in and imported the ones it needed. One major change that occurred in India's foreign trade from pre-colonial to colonial time was in its commodity pattern. Although India continued to have an export surplus, the pattern of foreign trade turned upside down. For instance, from the exporter of cotton textiles, India was converted into an importer of cotton textiles, thereby ruining India's rich traditional handicraft industries. As discussed above, India was a land of extensive manufacturers. Indian artisans were famous for their skills the world over. In fact, the reason for India's favorable foreign trade was its excellence in indigenous production. India indulged in a large-scale manufacture of cotton and silk fabrics, sugar, jute, dye stuffs, minerals, and metallic products like arms, metal wares, and oil. Towns like Decca and Murshidabad in Bengal, Patna in Bihar, Surat and Ahmedabad in Gujarat, Jaunpur, Varanasi, Lucknow, and Agra in UP, Multan and Lahore in the Punjab, Masulipatanam and Vishakhapatnam in Andhra, Bangalore in Mysore, and Coimbatore and Madurai in Madras were flourishing centers of textile industry. Kashmir specialized in woolen manufactures. Maharashtra, Andhra, and Bengal were prominent centers of shipbuilding industry. India's ships were bought by many European companies for their use. India towards the end of 18th century was undoubtedly one of the main centers of world trade and industry. This status of India was completely destroyed under the colonial times. Its beginning can be traced to the aftermath of industrial revolution in England. The machine-made cloth of England began to replace the indigenous manufacturers. India's artisans were forced out of production. It was this pressure from the British goods which led to the decline of India's traditional centers of economic activity listed above. The number of viewers also declined. Aspects of colonial rules. Two aspects of gradual expansion of British occupation of India deserve attention. The experiences gained by the British in one region of India were either extended or modified in other regions, and this learning through practice made them quite powerful in dealing with the problems of a large colony like India. The changes in British society demanded a different approach to satisfy the interests of emerging social groups in Britain. The essence of British colonial policies in India was determined by the dynamics of society which witnessed many changes in Britain. The modern British society progressed through stages like mercantile capitalism to industrial capitalism, and from competitive industrial capitalism to monopoly industrial capitalism. The interests of mercantile British capitalism lay in trade with India. The interests of industrial capitalism were, on the other hand, market oriented, in which the Indian colony was to provide raw materials and buy manufactured goods from Britain. Thus, social and economic changes in Britain directly influenced British colonial policies in India. Evolution of colonial rule. The British East India Company got a legal charter of trade from the British Crown in 1600, and shortly thereafter this trading company started conquering India. The conquest began in 1757 with the defeat of the Nawab of Bengal by Robert Clive. The East India Company ruled India for a century, that is, from the decisive Battle of Plassey in 1757 to 1857, when India fought a war of independence. The British defeated the Indians in this war, and in 1858 Queen Victoria assumed the responsibility of direct rule over India. The rule of East India Company ended and the British Parliament directly became responsible for the governance of India, and this continued till 1947. Impact of the colonial rule. Western viewpoint. What has been the impact of British rule over India? It must be clearly stated that sharp differences have always existed and continue to persist among the Indian nationalists and the Western scholars in their evaluation of the impact of British colonial rule over the economy, society, and polity of India. According to many Western writers, the British rule provided political unity and stability of governance to India. It has been maintained by the Western scholars that the British rescued India from chaos and provided political stability, as Morris, an American scholar, observes. Despite a Hindu tradition of imperial expansion, at no time in Indian history over any large region did a stable political unit survive for more than a century or a century and a half. There was nothing that compares with the imperial chronologies of Rome, Egypt, or China. A crucial consequence is that no tradition of continuous administrative institutions and no persistent bureaucracy ever developed. Indian political unity was a myth, an abstract concept which was centralized into a reality by the British rulers. In the absence of political unity, the 18th century India had very low levels of commerce and capital accumulation, and its implication was that the British rule in India had to deal with a very low level of economy. This argument of the Western writers challenges the nationalist argument that India was economically very attractive and profitable for the British. Second, the Western writers have suggested that the history of India revealed a very low level of agricultural productivity because it was based on a non-animal powered agriculture. According to many Western historians, the absence of any worthwhile technology kept a large portion of India as a virgin land as late as 1800. Tobacco, potato, and peanut cultivation was introduced by the British in India. Third, according to them, India could not claim any great achievements in manufacturing because it lacked technology. Although India had some excellent craftsmen and produced textiles and a few other manufactured goods, but they were the result of hard work and not of any developed technology. The evidence for this viewpoint is gathered from the 17th century records of the English, which points out the inelasticity of textile productivity in India. W.H. Moreland and many other scholars have used the evidence of early European travelers to prove that Indian technology was poor. On the basis of such evidence, Morris observes that, quote, the Indian subcontinent was a region in which per capita income was relatively low in the centuries before 1800. Given the lack of political stability, low agricultural and non-agricultural productivity, and insignificant commerce, no other conclusion is supportable. If the opinions of Morris, W.H. Moreland, or European travelers or British factory records are accepted that India was underdeveloped when the British gradually conquered it, then the implication is that the British conquest of India was beneficial for the economy, society, and polity of this country. In history, whenever two societies interact, the advanced and well organized society succeeds in establishing its control over the less advanced society, and at the same time, the less advanced society gains from the technology and organization of the advanced society. This is the basic premise of Western writers who view the British colonial rule as a rule of advanced society over an underdeveloped society. In this process, the underdeveloped society like India achieved benefits from the British rule, and they are enumerated by the Western scholars. Point. The British provided political unity and stability to India. Point. The British developed a system of roads and rail transport which had a positive impact on the economic development of India. The British developed irrigation and other public works which facilitated the growth of agriculture, commerce, and manufacturing activities in India. To sum up, the Western writers have made 2 points regarding the impact of British rule over India. First, on the eve of colonial expansion, the British found a highly underdeveloped India with low productivity in agriculture, very poor per capita income, and absence of any developed technology or tools for manufacturing. Second, the benevolent policies of the British helped in the establishment of political unity, a system of governance, and it laid the foundations of economic development in India. Impact of the colonial rules. Indian viewpoint. As against this, the Indian nationalist scholars put forward a different hypothesis. Dadabhai Nauroji, Ramesh Chandra Dutt in 19th century and Rajni Palme Dutt in 20th century represented the Indian nationalist perspective. The question they raised was that why did the British East India Company gradually get involved in local wars of conquest? Why did the British Queen in 1858 take up the direct responsibility of ruling over India till 1947? How was it that the East India Company, which came to India with a trading capital of 68,000 euro, went on to make fortunes? If the Indian economy was really stagnant, how did it sustain the East India Company and its expenditure? Two important aspects of British colonial rule over India highlighted by the nationalists were the drain theory and theory of deindustrialization. Drain theory. The drain theory, as formulated by nationalists, referred to the process by which a significant part of India's national wealth was being exported to England, for which India got no economic returns. In other words, India was made to pay an indirect tribute to the English nation. Needless to say, this drain of India's wealth to England in the form of salaries to British officers posted in India, home charges, and the profits made on British capital investment in India benefited England and diminished the sources of investment in India. Amya Bagchi observes, since after acquiring dominion over India, the East India Company and private traders could appropriate Indian goods or tribute or profits without really paying for them, Britain did not any longer have to send bullion to India to balance her accounts. Instead, bullion was now sent out from India either to China or to Britain. Bagchi's estimate is that external drain from Bengal constituted about 3 to 4% of the gross domestic material product. If expenditure on wars of East India Company is added to this period, Bagchi maintained that at least 5 to 6% of resources of the ruled land were siphoned off from any possibility of investment. An elementary principle of economic development is that surplus is generated for investment, but if the surplus is siphoned off from a colony to the colonizers, the colony gets underdeveloped. This was the impact of external drain on the economy of India under British colonial rule, starred starting with Bengal after the Battle of Plassey in 1757. External drain, however, was only one element of British exploitation of India, linked with other sources of exploitation like heavy taxation and an unfavorable trade. The British benefited immensely from the plunder and exploitation of India. Lord Curzon wrote, India is the pivot of our empire. If the empire loses any other part of its dominion, we can survive. But if we lose India, the sun of our empire will have set. The company obtained Diwani or civil administration rights of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa in 1765, and this opened new opportunities for plunder by the company. The land revenue because of Diwani rights were remitted by the company to England. This monopoly of plunder and exploitation by the company continued till the end of 18th century, when England moved from mercantile capitalism to industrial revolution and the emerging industrial capitalists in Britain started demanding the end of company rule in India. Deindustrialization. Besides the external drain theory, the nationalists argued that British rule led to deindustrialization of India. India was an exporter of cotton manufacture, and this was how the company started its trade, but gradually India became an important importer of cotton manufacture, and thus Indian artisans, craftsmen and important trading centers collapsed, and whatever manufacturing activity existed was destroyed under the impact of imports of cotton manufacture almost exclusively from Britain. Amia Bagchi observed that for more than 75 years up to 1913, India remained the major importer of cotton goods from Britain, often taking more than 40% of the British exports. Thus, the industrialization of England was accompanied by the decline and destruction of Indian cotton manufacturers. As a result, India witnessed from the early 19th century onwards a steady decline in population dependent on indigenous industries and a consequent overburdening of agriculture. This proved injurious to both. Its political ramification have been summed up by Sumit Sarkar. The sufferings of artisans have to be kept in mind as a significant factor in the understanding of many movements of our period, both in the way in which deindustrialization stimulated patriotic sentiments among intellectuals alike in the moderate, extremist, and Gandhian eras, as well as more directly in occasional urban and rural explosions of various types. The decay of Decca, Surat, Murshidabad, and many other flourishing towns bears testimony to deindustrialization of India. Sir Charles Trevelyan observed in 1840, the population of the town of Decca has fallen from 1,50,000 to 30,000 or 40,000, and the jungle and malaria are fast increasing upon the town. Decca, which was the Manchester of India, has fallen off from a very flourishing town to a very poor and small one. The distress there has been very great indeed. Phases of the colonial rule. The twin processes of drain and deindustrialization were carried out extensively through the various stages of colonial rule. The process itself started from 1757 when, with the Battle of Plassey, the East India Company, representing the British mercantile class, took over the Indian control. During the same period, the fundamental change was taking place in Britain by a series of inventions leading to the Industrial Revolution. For example, spinning jenny of Hargreaves in 1764, Watt's steam engine in 1765, water frame of Arkwright in 1769, Crompton's mule in 1779, Cartwright's power loom in 1785, and the steam engine applied to blast furnaces in 1788. Before these inventions, the Bank of England was established in 1694, and plunder of India helped capital accumulation, and inventions helped in gearing industrial revolution. The transformation in England created new interests, and East India Company became the target of attacks in England, and finally its fate was sealed by the War of Indian Independence in 1857. The impact of the British rule in the initial stage has been summed up by R.P. Dutt. While machine-made cotton goods from England ruined the weavers, machine-made twist ruined the spinners. Between 1818 and 1836, the export of cotton twist from England to India rose 5,200 times. The same process could be traced in respect of silk goods, woolen goods, iron, pottery, glass, and paper. The effects of this wholesale destruction of the Indian manufacturing industries on the economy of the country can be imagined. In England, the ruin of the old handloom weavers was accompanied by the growth of the new machine industry. But in India, the ruin of millions of artisans and craftsmen was not accompanied by any alternative growth of new form of industry. The old populous manufacturing towns, Decca, Murshidabad, Surat, and the like, were in a few years rendered desolate under the Pax Britannica with a completeness which no ravages of the most destructive war or foreign conquest could have accomplished. The merchant capital of the British found new opportunities in India when company started its conquest, in which monopolistic buying of Indian material was undertaken by the revenue earned from India, and they were exported to foreign markets with maximum profits. The pre-industrial British capital, instead of making so-called investments, were buying Indian commodities for profitable exports on the basis of money earned from revenue in India. Thus, the conquest of India by the British East India Company gave it the power to levy and collect land revenue and other taxes. And on the basis of gross profit, the company exploited Indian commodities. This semi-bondage situation of India made the British mercantile capitalism earn tribute from conquest. According to the Professor Habib, during the latter half of 18th century, the total British imports from India increased from 12% to 24%, and the British exports to India increased from 6.4% to only 9% of the total British exports. The phase of merchant capitalism gave way to the phase of industrial capitalism towards the beginning of the 19th century. Now, the emphasis shifted from revenue collection and trade to new forms of surplus appropriation. Indian economy was now geared to serve the interests of industrial England. India was now used to provide raw materials to the industries of England and a market for the ready-made British manufactured industrial goods. Indian resources continued to be drained out to England, although in different forms. Similarly, the process of deindustrialization also got accelerated. After 1857, when the British government took on direct control of India, some British capital also started pouring into the Indian market, along with the manufactured goods. This was the result of the accumulation of capital at an unprecedented level in the leading industrial countries. Now England needed India not only as a market for their goods, but also as a favorable ground for the investment of their capital. As a result, India started getting industrialized, but only on foreign capital. All the major industries like railways, jute, iron and steel were being run by British capital. As a result, British capital. Its result was a further drain of wealth, as all the profits made on British capital were going back to England. Thus, up to the end of 19th century, India was sucked by the British during both phases of colonialism, that is, during mercantile capitalism and industrial revolution in England. Agriculture under the colonial rule. Various aspects of a country's economy are interconnected. Agriculture supports industry and industry develops agriculture. The British agrarian policies in India destroyed prosperous agricultural economy and brought unparalleled human misery on the people living in the countryside. Even the plantation development policy of the British in the field of tea, tobacco, jute, and indigo did not benefit the Indian people. What was the basic agrarian policy of the British which led to the destruction of the Indian agricultural economy? The new land settlements. The disintegration of the Mughal Empire, the gradual conquest of the East India Company, and the desire of the British to extract maximum land revenue in cash made the British evolve a land system in India which would ensure payment of land revenue and also establish a collaborating class in rural India. The infamous permanent land settlement of Lord Cornwallis in 1793 for Bengal, Bihar, Odisha, and later extended to parts of North Madras created a class of zamindars who became landlords in perpetuity. The land revenue was fixed on permanent basis, and the zamindars were intermediaries between the rulers and the peasantry. The amount fixed broke the back of the peasantry. While under this system, the peasantry suffered enormously, the landlords and the British rulers benefited. Lord William Bentinck himself observed, if security was wanting against extensive popular tumult or revolution, it should say that the permanent settlement, though a failure in many other respects and most important essentials, has this great advantage at least of having created a vast body of rich landed proprietors deeply interested in the continuance of the British dominion and having complete command over the mass of the people. Besides the permanent settlement, the British evolved the Ryotwari system, implemented in Madras Presidency in 1820 by Sir Thomas Munro. The Ryotwari system had two features. First, the government and the cultivators would have direct relationship and land revenue will be settled directly between the two without any intermediary. Second, unlike the system of Lord Cornwallis, Munro's system was based on periodical reassessment of land revenue. Whether the system in more parts of India was permanent zamindari settlement or its minor variant temporary zamindari settlement or the Ryotwari settlements, landlordism became the system under the British. It disposed the cultivators, moneylenders entered rural India. The tenants were unprotected and majority of real cultivators became landless laborers. When real cultivators are disposed and intermediaries and non-cultivating interests emerge powerful, agricultural development suffers and the majority becomes poor. This happened in India as a result of the policies of the British. The beneficiaries were landlords and the government and victims were the peasants. In the words of Daniel Thorner, in no other period of Indian history can be find so large, so well established and so secure a group of landholders as that which grew up and flourished between the 1790s and 1940s. The agrarian system as evolved by the British had built in system of destruction of agriculture which is proved by the famines of 1870s and late 1890s and epidemics and slow growth of population. Agriculture could develop if investments are made in public works either by the government or by the efforts of the peasants. Naturally, poor peasantry could not do it. The British did it in a very limited manner. Wherever government took initiative in public works, results were encouraging, as in the case of the canal system in Punjab. Since the government and the landlords showed very little interest in public works, agriculture remained backward. The impoverishment of the peasantry was a glaring fact during the British rule over India. The agrarian policies pursued by the British increased the number of landless laborers. The pressure of population on backward village economy and the profitable plantation economy filled the pockets of the British. The magnitude of rural poverty was graphically described by the saying that the Indian is born in debt to the moneylender, was stated by the Simon Commission. Even for paying land revenue to the government, the peasants were obliged to borrow, and how could an indebted peasantry develop agriculture? Commercialization of agriculture. The new land settlements discussed above brought about a revolution in the property relations. Along with this, a commercial revolution, also known as the commercialization of agriculture, began to take shape in Indian agriculture around 1860. Simply put, commercialization of agriculture meant that the agricultural produce was oriented towards a market. That is, agriculture became a marketable commodity. Many factors were responsible for it. A rapid development of railway occurred in this period. The length of the railway tracks increased from 288 miles in 1857 to 30,576 in 1908. This expansion of the railway facilitated the commercialization of agriculture. The opening of Suez Canal in 1869 shortened the sea route between England and India by about 3,000 miles and brought the two countries closer to each other for purpose of trade. Certain technological innovations in England between 1873 and 1886 replaced sailing vessels and modern steam ships. This brought down the freight rates by half and had a stimulating effect on the export of agricultural produce from India, which grew rapidly both in volume and value. The Civil War in North America diverted for the time being the British demand for raw cotton from United States to India. Consequently, there was a sudden increase in the export of raw cotton from India after 1862. From 5.6 crore in 1859 to 60, it rose to 37.5 crore in 1864 to 65. The result of all this was a phenomenal increase in the export of agricultural goods from India. The total value of export went up by more than 500% from 1859 to 60 to 1906 to 7. Paradoxically, the increase in the foreign demand for Indian agricultural produce did not lead to the development of Indian agriculture. There were many reasons for this. The backward agricultural organization in the country, lack of resources with the farmer for technological development, his unpreparedness for the commercialization and therefore inability to take full advantage of the opportunities offered, absence of any increase in the productivity of land, and the role of colonialism, which superimposed a commercialization process from the top. It was precisely because of colonialism that the commercialization of agriculture emerged as an artificial, forced process which could not lead to a genuine growth in agriculture. The objective conditions of such a growth had already been destroyed by colonialism. However, the impact of the commercialization was quite far-reaching. To begin with, it led to scarcity of food. This happened because the increasing demand for cash crops like raw cotton, jute, indigo and opium etc. was met by substitution of commercial crops for trading food crops. This was done by the farmers to increase their profits, as the commercial crops were more paying, but its impact on the food supply of the country was disastrous. It was reported that one major cause of the famine of 1866 in Bengal and Orissa was that the best land was cultivating indigo instead of rice. Yet another impact was a differentiation among the farmers. Although a small section of farmers who had the resources prospered by shifting completely to the cultivation of commercial crops, the poor farmer suffered great losses as he had to now depend on a market for his own food requirements. However, there were some positive aspects also. Regional specialization grew and the village lost its isolation and got linked with the world market. The farmer in his choice of crops come to attach greater importance to market demands and prices than to his own immediate needs. But on the whole, Indian agriculture failed to take advantages of the opportunities offered by the commercialization of agriculture, largely because of the constraint imposed by colonialism. In other countries, commercialization was accompanied by an increase in the cultivable land as well as in the productivity of land. Commercial crops did not replace food crops but added to them. But nothing of that sort happened in India. Impact on agriculture. To sum up, agrarian system and policies pursued by the British created stagnant agriculture, indebted peasantry, galloping landless laboring class, deaths through malnutrition, famines and epidemics. The basic policy of the British was to extract land revenue whether peasantry could pay it or not. The distress sale of land to pay land revenue was not discouraged as it was a direct consequence of British land revenue policies. Professor Iran Habib aptly describes the situation. He observes, the land revenue under the preceding Indian regimes was fixed as a share of the crop and varied according to the crop cultivated. The land revenue under the British, whether directly imposed on the rears or assessed on the jamindars, was a true tax on land. Thus, revenue collection went up, the prices of food grain declined, the rural indebtedness increased, and the rural economy was depressed. The direct appropriation of the agriculture surplus was the sole goal of the British rule, and its direct consequences was impoverishment of the peasantry and stagnation of the rural economy. Role of the colonial state. After 1857, when the British government directly became responsible for the governance of India, the foundation of colonial state was firmly established. The British colonial state has been characterized as benevolent despotism or a liberal laissez-faire state which performed the role of night watchman with minimal interference in the Indian affairs. This is historical falsehood spread by the Western historians. The powerful colonial state was pro-landlord, pro-moneylender, pro-princess and pro-British economic interests in India. The Queen Victoria in Proclamation of 1858 stated, "We shall respect the rights, dignity and honor of the native princes as our own." Further, the Queen assured, "We know and respect the feelings of attachment with which the natives of India regard the land inherited from their ancestors, and we desire to protect them in all rights connected therewith, subject to equitable demands of the state." While the above promises of a queen were only to seek social support and collaboration of the native princes and landlords, the essence of the abolition of the company's rule in 1858 was to serve the interests of British industrial classes in exploiting Indian market. The main goal of colonial state established in 1858 was to protect and promote the interests of the British industrial capitalists who were occupying a leading position in the British Parliament. The British colonial state completely integrated India with the world capitalist economy, and as a colony, India was subjected to exploitation. The role of the colonial state in the economic development of India as a colony cannot be understood by emphasizing the establishment of railways by the British or other modernizing activities like the spread of English language and education. These are peripheral facts in evaluating the role of colonial state in India. The basic goal of colonial state was to promote British capital and its investment in India for profit, and to achieve this goal, India under the colonial state was made a market for raw materials for the British industry and investment for British capital in sectors of Indian economy which brought profits to British investors. The promotion of plantation and mines, jute mills, banking, insurance, shipping, export-import concerns, railways were all under British, who were favored and patronized by the colonial state. If on the one hand colonial bureaucracy extended facilities and concessions to the British in India, on the other it discriminated against the locals through highly biased and discriminatory tariff and excise policies. Professor Sumit Sarkar observes, behind a facade of laissez-faire, government policies often actively promoted European enterprise. Railways under the guaranteed system and the allotment of vast tracts of land to Assam tea planters at nominal prices would be two obvious examples. While discriminating against Indians, the railway network and freight rates encouraged traffic with ports as against that between inland centers. The organized money market was largely under white control. Most significant of all, perhaps, was the fact that 19th century Indian economic growth was largely geared to export needs, and the British controlled the bulk of the external trade of the country through exchange banks, export-import firms, and shipping concerns. The main features of colonial state and its economic policies were geared towards ruthless exploitation of India. The mechanisms of the exploitation were clear. India was structurally integrated with the world capitalist economy. India was made an export-oriented economy. India was to supply raw material to the British industry. The British in India worked under the protective umbrella of the colonial state, which protected and safeguarded the interests of British investors. Indian capitalists were obstructed by discriminatory policies of the British colonial bureaucracy. This colonial state was racial and exploitative, and India as a colony was sucked for British interests. The beginning of 20th century and especially two world wars saw a change in this trend and provided an opportunity for the development of the Indian capitalist class in the fields of textile, sugar, jute, some chemical factories, and steel plants. The world wars had an impact on British economy and the pre-war situation, in which India was profitable for export of British manufacturers and a secure market for profitable investment, was changing, and the economy and requirements of Second World War compelled the British to induce development of indigenous industries under the indigenous capitalists in India. Summary. While swimming up, two facts need an emphasis. First, the colonial state was a powerful system of exploitation of India for the British industrial capital. Second, the pressures of the two world wars and the situation created by it helped the development of Indian capitalist class and industries in the fields of sugar, jute, textile, iron and steel and chemicals. When the British left India, they left a stagnant economy. The development of industries, as mentioned above, does not mean that India was an industrial nation on the eve of independence in 1947. An industrial nation can develop if a proper infrastructure is developed along with basic industries like heavy machine tools, steel and capital goods industries are established to support industrialization. The result of British economic policies was that India had industries without industrialization because the colonial state was not interested in this aspect of economy. Further, Indian agriculture was stagnant. In terms of raw material for industry, the situation was pretty bad. The direct consequence of British rule over India was low per capita income, low agricultural output, low level of savings, underdeveloped infrastructure, and low level of human skills. Thus, the claim that the British modernized Indian economy is quite hollow in the light of the above description. Thank you so much.